saw Dr. Zhivago the other day. I don't know if you watch that at all. And it's interesting because they talk about it has to do with the Russian Revolution. It's a love story. It's a very long movie. It's over 3 hours. It's okay. I mean, it's a romance. It's not a documentary, so it focuses more on the characters. But some of the Communist Party members talk about like, oh, I have no personal life. My life is to the party now. And it's a similar dynamic here where it's like, oh, there is no standard of living. I don't have a bigger TV than my neighbor. I don't have a bigger house. We all have the same. So I think that's why he puts standard of living in quotes. The idea is everyone is supposed to have the same stuff. How this would be achieved to me is magic, but yeah.
With the standard of living, that made me kind of think of the living wage. When someone's like, oh, you need a living wage to do this. And I just ask people, like, the quality of life, first of all, the quality of life that you have now, I think if you're having a living wage. Now, what quality of life do they imagine would this living wage support? And how much do they think somebody back when Marcuse was writing, I mean, I guess you could count the inflation and things like that, would have to earn in order to have the living wage that they're talking about? How much work and time and hours do they think those people were actually putting in order to have the living wage that they think, like some of the things they have access to are way better than the things that they had at that time. And lastly with that, I try to ask them, like, this standard of living, do they imagine that there's other countries or other times when the socio-political system, the political system, some of the economic systems, the social interactions were more just and accurate to the things that they want to see United States of America and the West become, that they look at those places and be like, yes, their racial relations are better. Yes, the relation between genders are better. Yes, their economic systems are better there. They're following more what critical theory claims to want and what the communism claims to want. What is to each what they want. What was it? What's the thing with like to each
from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs.
Do they think there's places like that match that better, that have given a better quality of life than they have in the United States of America now? But of course, a lot of them will say that was not real communism. It was not true. And then critical theory is relatively new. But what do they think? If they can say, if we do this, we think society will be like this. But I hardly see any actual markers for them to actually say that you can actually test them on. It's more just like, let's do this, and then things will get better. Like,
well, remember, he talks about that in Repressive Tolerance. He talks about historical possibilities or something, meaning he feels it's possible this could happen, but he doesn't say we should do this like this country did. They had this and this was the result. And this comes up a lot when I debate people on the healthcare stuff, especially with the Scandinavian countries. Like people say, oh, in these countries, they have quote unquote free healthcare. But then I point out, well, you have to look at Sweden in particular. Sweden hasn't had a war in over 100 years. So it's like they've just been building up stuff. They have a lot of iron ore. They have a lot of oil. It's a wealthy per capita country. They have very low obesity rates. They don't have diabetes, heart attacks, other things that we have. So it's a lot easier to have that sort of system. And then on top of it, they pay taxes through the nose. So it's like, it's not this utopia that you envision. Like this comes at other costs,
Yeah. And with some of these things, this liberated consciousness that would promote and the development of science and technology, which societies do they think have made more advancements in science and technology compared to others? And what socio-political systems were those countries going on? And in this current case, the United States of America outpaces most other countries in pretty much every field when it comes to actual advancements in science. Like people say, oh, they spend this highest amount of money in healthcare. It's like, yes, you look at the amount of actual things that are developed in the healthcare field, and majority of them, it's like 90% of them come from the United States of America. That's part of the research and development. United States of America, at least that's one field where the United States of America still is the research and development capital of the world on medical type of things. So those are the type of things where it's like science and technology wise, who is actually developing that? And would they say, due to the fact that the United States of America has developed so many of them, or the West in general, would that make the West the most liberated consciousness kind of place? I don't know if they'd say that.
Well, so it's interesting here. What was I going to say? So it's interesting he uses the word form in quotes. I think that's a reference to Plato, who he's going to reference in a little bit. So then what else was I going to say here? Art forming reality, then imagination, and then invalidated a new reality principle. I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it, as opposed to reality is objective. It'd be a new reality. Yeah. So there will be some Kant references too, but like, kind of some kind of interesting stuff, I suppose.
Yeah, that new reality principle could be part of that lived experience type of thing.
Oh, one thing that was interesting too, there's that book, The Cave and the Light, which is that book about Plato and Aristotle and how they've influenced Western history. And the author Arthur Herman made a point that I hadn't thought of, but kind of makes sense now. How if you notice Hegel's writing, a lot of things are capitalized. Like he talks about the spirit, the world spirit, all this. In German, the nouns are capitalized. I don't know if you know that, but he was saying that that's sort of fitting because it almost is a kind of a Platonist theme. The idea of like, this is my ideal spirit, this is my ideal world, this is my reason is capitalized. Like it kind of makes sense almost that it would work like that. Yeah.
So it's more like a subjective thing where like this is reason to this group of people. Like this is an object reason rather than the existence of reason.
Yeah, reason is the spirit that perfects history essentially, and reason is operating through people through the dialectic.
Okay, I might actually mesh with something because I was kind of thinking how the stories we tell about reality isn't a story, but we tell stories about reality. So the story was the capitalized kind of noun of what reality is, but reality exists without that identification of it being reality.
Yeah.
That's the same thing. Like what's true is true, and then truth I think would be capitalized in that sense, where this is a truth because it's a agreed construct that we use to identify something that we've observed in the limited way that we can observe that thing. Yeah.
Yeah, because like I say, in German, that's the structure of the grammar, but he makes sense that this is a Platonist philosophy because if you're talking about your world of forms, or it's at least sort of based on those themes, it would make sense that everything's capitalized because this is pure reason, this is the pure spirit, this is the world, this is the end of history. You know, all of that is capitalized. It kind of makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So next one. The term quote unquote aesthetic in its dual connotation of quote unquote pertaining to the senses and quote unquote pertaining to art may serve to designate the quality of the productive creative process and environment of freedom. Technique, assuming the features of art, would translate subjective sensibility into a new objective form into reality. This would be the sensibility of men and women who do not have to be ashamed of themselves anymore because they have overcome their sense of guilt. They have learned not to identify themselves with the false fathers who have built and tolerated and forgotten the Auschwitzes and Vietnams of history, the torture chambers of all the secular and ecclesiastical inquisitions and interrogations, the ghettos and the monumental temples of the corporations, and who have worshipped the higher culture of this reality. If and when men and women act and think free from this identification, they will have broken the chain which linked the fathers and sons from generation to generation. They will not have redeemed the crimes against humanity, but will have become free to stop them and to prevent their recommencement. Chance of reaching the point of no return to the past, if and when the causes are eliminated which have made the history of mankind the history of domination and servitude. These causes are economic, political, but since they have shaped the very instincts and needs of men, no economic and political changes will bring the historical continuum to a stop unless they are carried through by men who are physiologically and psychologically able to experience things and each other outside the context of violence and exploitation.
Okay. Now here there is the general aspect of something we talked last time. Instead of history repeats itself, history rhymes. So there is an aspect there. And I think a key thing here is there's some erasure of history. Now, I can get into the talks and I can see where some people can make a case and say, oh, let's not have statues to certain people. But when they say let's not even teach certain things as part of history, that gets very problematic because that's when you get to the point where I think part of the reason the West is doing better than other places is because they read and talk about the history. And yes, the West itself, and this is very something natural to humanity, has fallen into that aspect where they just want to tell the good stories. But I think in the United States of America, more than many other places, you are open to actually talk about the garbage things that you've done in the past as a culture, as a society. Yeah. You can't really do that in China, in a place like China, for example.
No.
So is that going to be something more beneficial? As much of the struggle that we're going through, these struggle sessions and things like that in the United States of America and the West, I do think that still is preferable than having a place like China where the Communist Party of China will just be like, no, everything we did in the past was completely okay. We can't talk about any of the bad things that we did. That's another extreme, and I don't think what's happening in the United States of America is anywhere close yet to the extreme. But the people who are saying, let's actually jettison even talking about the things that we did in the past because they're so bad, that is still kind of sort of similar in result, because in result, then you'll start talking about the things that are good. Now, in the United States of America and the West, the difference will be they think it'll be more them deciding, the general populace deciding what is considered good and rewriting things and retelling things, reimagining things. But it still comes to the point where I think it's good to focus and make known the horrible things that are happening. And I think a recent example was Muhammad Anwar just got in a he was in a car in the Navy Yard in Washington D.C. area, and two young black females like tried to carjack him, and he was fighting back. They tased him a few times. He drove off, and then had a car accident. They had a car crash around the corner, and he was thrown out of the car and ended up dying from his injuries. Yeah. Now, that story is being posted, and I saw some people saying, "Oh, how can you post this information out there? Like, it's you shouldn't post this out. It's insensitive." Then the person was like, "Oh, what do you think his family thinks?" Like, have you asked them? Then the family came out, and they're like, "Oh, there's a note from the family saying we would like you not to share this." But I'm like, I take that into consideration, but I still think it's worth sharing because people should see what's happening. People should see this actual thing. You're not forcing anyone to watch it. The family member's not forcing it. It's something that happened in public. It's of public interest. It's not something as the actions going on. If you think about what's going on, is horrific, is horrible, but it's not a grotesque thing. Like you don't see like blood or there's no curse words and things like that. But it's something to see that's happening. And it's like I ask people like that, if George Floyd's family had come out and said, "Don't show her the video," do people think they should have stopped showing the video? It's like no, people need to see what happened. Like it's some people need to see to believe that this is happening, and I think that's more positive. So the bad things, I think we need to focus on that. We need to see how much worse things were in the past in order to avoid going to those places again and understanding and valuing the things that we've done to come from that place, I think.
Yeah, and as I touch on, there's another great Lindsay video about the creation of a new American mythology, how it is true that there were a lot of people who romanticized America's past. And the thing is, some of the stuff the critical theorists say is right. Like, they did downplay certain atrocities, obviously slavery, segregation, Indian removal, all that. But at the same time, what they're doing is basically an overcorrection. You don't go so far in the other direction that you forget that, no, America has done a lot of great stuff too. And there has to be just a balanced approach here. We have to acknowledge that the good things here shouldn't be taken for granted, but let's not pretend it was all apple pie, baseball, fireworks, and everything either.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. This has been a clip from an actual longer recording that I'll try to leave a link to on the screen or somewhere around here where you're listening to this.
Presents. 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 Presents.
Peasants.
Okay.